I'm back. Okay, now we're going to work on the gown itself. The first thing I'm going to start with is the sleeve. That's that wedge-shaped piece. Okay, with the sleeve, go to the narrow end, and that's gonna be your cuff or your wrist. So we're gonna turn this under 1/4 inch, and we're just going to give it a little 1/4 inch hem there. If you want to pin it, that's fine. If you don't want to pin it, however is easiest for you to use it. So we're going to turn it under 1/4 inch and give it a little hem right along that edge. Okay, now we're going to turn it under 1/4 inch again, and that's going to hide that fraying edge. It'll hide it inside so it won't fray when it's washed. So turn it under another 1/4 inch and just sew right down there again, finishing up that hemming. You'll do that on both sleeves. Go ahead and trim off my threads. Now we're going to take and put these right sides together, and I do pin here. Right sides together and those open ends. I'm going to pin this to keep it from slipping around on me. Don't have to pin it very far, just 5 or 6 inches, 4 or 5 inches. Then you're going to take a ruler and you're going to measure up from the bottom of that hem. You're going to measure up about 1 inch and make a mark right on this right. Measure up about 1 inch from the end and just make a little mark right out here. It's going to be in your seam. Then from that mark, you're going to measure again, and you're going to measure about 2 inches. And you're going to make another little mark. That's where you're making the thumb hole for the thumb to go through. So just above that second mark, maybe about 1 inch up, you're going to put it under your machine and you're going to sew from just about 1 inch above that mark down to that mark, and then you're going to stop. Quarter of an inch. I usually take a couple back stitches just so that it locks it in place. So down to that mark, back up a few stitches, then come forward a few stitches. That gives it a really good tight lock there. So when they're putting the thumb in and out, it won't break open. Now, right here between these two dots, we're going to take those and we're going to fold it. One part of it, we're going to fold it 1/4 inch. Then we're just going to tack that in place, like you did the hem, 1/4 inch. all the way down and off the end of your fabric. Then you're going to go to the other side and you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to give it a 1/4 inch turn. On that end, you'll probably turn it around and start from the bottom, from the hem. Turn it under a 1/4 inch. Up to that mark where you sewed the other part to. Trim off your threads. All right, so now you have a little bit of a hem from that second mark you made all the way to the end. You see it's hemmed under. It kind of makes a nice, neat looking part here, and it's not going to keep fraying it. So then you'll put these back together and pin them in place, matching up those hems down there. And then you're going to, starting at the hem end, you're going to sew up. You're going to start sewing. You're going to back tack over here to make a good strong lock. Then you're going to sew up about 1 inch and do back stitch again to lock it in place. Trim off all your little threads because you'll have lots of them. It's just easier to trim them off as you go because you'll never find them when you finish the project and try to find all of the little loose threads. I just trim them as I go. Neaten it all up. All right. Then you'll see once that sleeve is turned right side out, it's good and locked in place here so it won't rip apart. It's locked right here so when they put their thumb, and right here so when they put their thumb in and out of this hole, it won't tear off. Okay? Do that on both sleeves. Then the next thing you do is you take the top part, the long side, and you turn it in half, right sides together. Find the midpoint. And I just take a little tiny snip. So it makes like a tiny little V right there in the midpoint. Or you can put a mark there if you want, but I just find it just as easy to put a little V in it right there. So then you're going to get your gown. Open it up, find where you made those slits. You cut that wedge out to make the slits. That's where we're going to put the sleeve in. So you're going to take the sleeve that you just worked on, where that V is, and right sides to right sides. Make sure that you've turned it back out if you turned it in to see that that was nice. Make sure that this is back outside. So then you're going to put it right side to right side. And down at the bottom where that slit is, at the little V down there, you're going to pin this V right there. That's your midpoint. And that's going to go right there at that bottom of that wedge that you cut out. And just pin it in place. Then going up this side, all the way up the top of that slit, you'll pin that in place to keep it nice and secure so it doesn't slip for you when you're making your seam. Just pin it in place. However many pins you need. Sometimes they don't quite match, but it's okay because we can trim that. It's not going to make that much of a difference in there. Then you do the same thing to the other side of the slit. Making it over. Pinning it. All right, so then you're going to sew this seam 1/4 inch. Or 1/2 inch. If you're using a regular sewing machine, you probably should make it like a 1/2 inch. I usually do a 1/4 inch because I use a serger. But if you're going to use a regular sewing machine, you're going to need the extra room. So just make it a 1/2 inch seam. When you get down close to that V, it gets kind of bunched up underneath. So you just kind of have to keep smoothing it out and get around the V as well as you can. Sometimes there'll be a couple little pleats in there, but it's not going to make a difference because that's going to be your underarm and nobody's going to even know it. So you go around there, go around the V, continue down the other side. See where this V was? You'll want to go back and check and make sure that you got that in the seam, because sometimes it can slide off a little bit. But you can see some, I get a little puckering in there, but it's not going to be a big deal. But you do need to check to make sure that the bottom piece didn't slide back and you didn't catch it at all. So once you got that done, then you can open up your gown. And that seam that you just sewed, front sides together, you're gonna match the two sides together. Give it a good pin up here where the seams meet. This is going to be your shoulder now. So, and sometimes they don't quite, they're not even. They have a little extra, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. And this is going to be the top of your arm. So then you're going to sew from here all the way to here. And then this is going to be your shoulder. So you're going to sew across there and see, like here it didn't quite even out. So what I usually do is I come up here, you're 1/2 inch up here, you're doing a 1/2 inch seam, you're coming up the sleeve, and you get to this corner and you see that there's this extra up here. I just sort of merge it into, so that by the time you're over here, you're at that 1/2 inch, and then you just trim that off. It's not going to make that big a difference. Then you sew all the way down to the end here. And see, this is where your neck is. So that's why it doesn't go all the way across. This is where your binding's going to go, and you're going to put the ties on. So you're going to have this little flap, and it looks wrong, but it's right. So I usually start at the bottom of my sleeve where I made that thumb hole. And you may want to pin the whole thing because it will get slippery. I'm not a pinner. So you start down there right where you left off before, at the beginning of that thumb hole. Do a couple back stitches. Do a 1/2 inch seam all the way up that arm. You get close to that shoulder area where that seam meets. You're going to notice that it's not quite meeting, so I'm just going to come up, ease that in as best I can. Try to keep those seams together as much as possible. When you get close to that seam and you notice that when you pull the other 2 pieces over, the rest of the shoulder and the front of the gown, you'll notice that there's sometimes a lot over on this side. So I just kind of graduate over on this seam here till I meet up with this one over here. So I'm back to a 1/2 inch seam. Go till you get to that rounded neck part, and then you do a couple back stitches there to tag it in place. See, this is what I'm talking about, where you're coming up here, your 1/2 inch seam, and you get to this crossing of these seams, and there's all this extra fabric here. I don't know what they did to their pattern, but so I just kind of graduate it until I get over here, and I'm back to a 1/2 inch seam. I'm sorry, 1/2 inch seam. Anyway, then that's your shoulder. And you're done with that one sleeve. Then you can turn that sleeve right side out. See if you did it correctly. It should look like a normal shoulder. And you can go in and trim that off. And I'll be back in a minute to finish up the gown.